SpaceX is going public. This is the biggest IPO in history at $1.75 trillion valuation. And everyone is asking the same question right now. Should you buy it? Now, this is an exciting launch, and I just took a high-risk trade on this myself. $10,000 that either pays off several times over or goes to zero within days. At the end of this video, I'm going to show you exactly what I did because it's probably not the trade that you would expect. Let's talk about the part that nobody's telling you. It's almost never the people buying on day one of an IPO who win. It's the insiders selling to them. My name is Zack Bakos. I'm a wealth management and financial planning professional, and I've been investing for over 10 years. I've grown my own portfolio into the millions, and I've coached over 2,000 high net worth individuals. So let's get into this. Last year, SpaceX did around $19 billion in revenue, which is growing fast, up about a third from the year before. It's genuinely an incredible company, and they want to list it at about $1.7 trillion, which is around 94 times its current revenue, which would make it literally the most expensive stock in the entire S&P 500. So here's a line to hold on to for the rest of this video. A great company and a great investment are not the same thing. The company can change the world, and the price can still be far too high for an investment. And right now, that price is far too high for me personally. Now, one thing to keep in mind with SpaceX specifically, that it has already a huge amount of new contracts signed that will become revenue over the coming years. And it's a big part of why the price is so high. It's just not there yet. But if you want to trade the launch in the short term, it might make sense. So what's likely going to happen is that it's likely going to go up. There's a lot of people piling in to get in immediately at the launch. But as a long-term investment, I wouldn't get into it personally right now. Normally, there are rules in place to protect ordinary investors from exactly this kind of launch. And SpaceX got a lot of them banned. Rule 1 was that a brand new company usually has to trade for 3 to 12 months before the big indexes will touch it, because the IPO prices tend to be all over the place at the start. The Nasdaq brought in a new fast entry rule that lets SpaceX into the Nasdaq 100 just 15 days after listing. So the retirement fund managers, the people running the money inside most pensions and 401ks, can get it even sooner. Rule 2 was that the Nasdaq used to require at least 10% of the company to be publicly tradable. And this is very important. I'm going to talk about this a little bit later in the video. But that requirement was also dropped. And it matters because SpaceX is only floating about 4 to 5% of its shares on day one, and billions in index money that has to buy it in the moment it enters those indexes. And the float is so small that it's very easy to manipulate the price short term. So with all that's forced index buying, plus loads of retail money getting pulled in at the launch, the price is likely going straight up right away at the launch. Now, credit to the S&P 500, they actually said no and refused to bend their rules to launch SpaceX immediately in their index, but the Nasdaq said yes, and those retirement funds are piling in as well. So if you're invested into those funds, you're about to become a SpaceX shareholder, whether you want it or not. But maybe you're a person who just wants to understand, how do I trade this launch? How do I take advantage of this right away? How would I invest into this company? And you're not sure what to do, then the rest of this video is for you. So let's recap. Because of the low float and the high demand of buying pressure, I would assume that SpaceX will rally at the launch. But then what? Because remember, that 5% float is what's in the market available to buy. What about the remaining 95%? Well, that is sitting with the early investors, it's sitting with the employees and with the venture funds who backed this years ago at a very low valuation, which means they are sitting on huge returns, hundreds of billions of dollars in paper profit between them. And the whole point of going public is to finally cash that out. But they can't sell it all on day one because of something that is called the lockup period. Here's how it works. A lockup simply stops the early investors from selling their shares right away at the IPO. For SpaceX specifically, here's the schedule. The first big unlock comes right after its first earnings report, around 2 months in. Insiders can sell up to 20% of their shares. And if the stock is up 30% or more, another 10 on top. Around 5 months in, after the second earnings report, another 28% unlocks. And by 6 months, everything is unlocked. And that's going to create a lot of sell pressure. The only one who stays locked up the whole way through is Elon Musk himself. So put yourself in their shoes. You just turned $1 million into $20 million. What are you going to do? Are you going to take profits or are you going to buy more? Of course not. Of course you're selling right into that forced index buying, creating your exit liquidity. So the simple way to think about this is that if you want to just trade the launch, it's likely going to be a successful one in the short term because there are almost no sellers and a lot of demand. But if you're an investor who wants to get into this for the long term, just know that every early investor is looking to start cashing out within the next 5 months. And this is not just me guessing, this is how almost every major tech IPO of the last decade has gone. Facebook fell 54%, Uber fell almost 70%, Lyft fell 80%, Robinhood fell 90%, Rivian fell 88%, and every one of them had people online saying buy the dip all the way down. But on average, they dropped 55% at their worst point in year one. Now run that on SpaceX. 55% of 1.75 trillion is roughly $800 billion in valuation. Honestly, right around that valuation is where I would be interested in buying this thing. Now, here's the part that the doom accounts will leave out, because plenty of these IPOs eventually came back and beat the market. The biggest reward went to people who waited to buy the dip. So if you genuinely wanted to own SpaceX in the long run, here is how I would approach it. Honestly, I wouldn't touch it at the launch. I would simply wait for it to drop around 50% in the first year of its launching, which history says usually come again in the first 12 months, around that $800 billion mark in terms of valuation, where it will make a lot more sense in terms of risk to reward to the upside. And yeah, sometimes the best trade is just waiting, even if that means waiting 1 year for this long-term investment. Okay, so the trade I promised you at the start. Now, I'm actually not looking to trade the SpaceX IPO itself. I just think that you can't trade an IPO with any real edge. There is only assumptions and no data to back it off of. So I'm playing the space narrative itself. When a launch this big hits that is likely to be successful, usually the whole segment tends to run with it. So I put $10,000 into a high-risk options trade on a space stock that moves with that hype, and it's called ASTS, AST Space Mobile. And I've taken a bull call spread, bought the $95 call and sold the $130 call, expiring on the 18th of June. So that caps my risk and my reward for one trade. For this to pay out, ASTS need to get above roughly $100, and right now it's trading right around $88. And just to be upfront, this is a very small position for my portfolio. I'm not recommending anyone to follow into this. Only consider this kind of trading if you are comfortable with taking big risk, because this is one of those trades, again, that can go to zero or return 4x on that. And you have to be very comfortable with the position sizing that you go into this, because this is not investing. This is absolutely a lottery ticket that I'm personally completely fine with losing. So if high risk options are not your field, do not take this trade. I'm just simply sharing what I'm doing with a very tiny fragment of my portfolio, less than 0.5%. And overall, I'm a long-term investor, but sometimes I do like to have fun and take this kind of risky trades. So that's the SpaceX IPO, the biggest in history, the most expensive in history. Buy the hype on Friday, and history says that you will likely to be underwater within a 6-month time frame. But if you wait for that drop, you might just get to own a generational company at a price that makes a lot more sense. Now, I did make a public bet with real money on this, $10,000. The moment SpaceX lists, I'm tracking exactly what this does in a follow-up video. So subscribe so you can see how this ends. And if you want the exact framework I use to build an investment portfolio for long term that do not rely on gambling or getting lucky on IPOs like this, then a $10 million portfolio roadmap totally for free is available, linked in the description.